All right, guys. So, can you believe it's already been 1,128 miles? Oh, this Katana has been so much fun. So, what all have I done to it? Well, let's go over that. We got the RNG frame sliders. Got the T-Rex tail tidy with that fender, that bumper really, eliminator. We've got the blinker conversion, the daytime running light blinker conversion. Getting rid of that weird looking stick of a turn indicator that was sticking out of the side of the bike. Got the upgraded Suzuki windscreen, which is mandatory on this bike. Big shout out to my boy Orange Crush for hooking me up with the M4 can. Got the slip-on on this bike. Love how this thing sounds, and it runs amazingly well. We've got the restrictor removed out of the airbox. Still rocking the stock filter. Cleaned up the look of the factory muffler. Still rocking the stock cats. Oh, this bike is so good. But of course, if you haven't noticed already, we've got the Sato handlebar kit, which for this motorcycle, I would consider mandatory. We've got an ASV clutch lever. Again, for this bike, I would consider mandatory for the adjustment. Still working on the brake lever. There's some differences with the Katana in how everything comes together. So you can't just use a regular GSX-S part, weirdly enough. So I'm working with those guys to get a lever that will work for that. I love the ASV brake levers and the clutch levers. Lots of adjustment. Something gets weird, those things bend out of the way. And of course, we've got, who's this good looking fella back here? Hey, the bar end mirrors. Oh, and I can't forget rocking the S22s in the factory 190/50 out back. And of course, the 120/70 up front. Walk right past it and it might bite you, but we are rocking the Vortex sprocket in the factory gearing of 44 teeth. And we are rocking the stock shock, stock spring, but I did adjust it to factory GSX-S settings, which is set to 4. Comes from the factory at 3. And that pretty well wraps up the modification list on this motorcycle. Really not a lot done. Really more cosmetic than anything else, aside from some adjustments in the tires. But this bike doesn't really need a whole lot from the factory. It's a GSXR 1000 vintage of 2005, if you will, for the engine in this thing and the frame and the swing arm. It's really capable as it comes. So throwing a lot of other modifications to this motorcycle, I don't think are gonna really yield a much more enjoyable riding experience. And I gotta tell you, speaking of enjoying, I've had so much fun with this bike, and I love the engine and the way that it combines with the chassis and the suspension of this bike, which by the way are still sitting at stock settings, at least stock for a GSX S1000 that is. Now, with these motorcycles, the only real difference being that the rear shock is set softer. All the other settings are all the same throughout the GSX-S family. I left them alone, and they're doing extremely well with some very aggressive riding. In fact, I need to dial in my tire pressure more than I need to dial in the suspension. That's how good I have found it to be. If you're a returning rider and you don't necessarily want a leader class motorcycle, the kind that puts out like 190 plus horsepower, you want something that's going to be more familiar to you. Well, the GSX-S family of motorcycles, which is the GSX-S, the GSX-S Katana, you've got there was an F variant of this thing with a full fairing, a very cool bike. There's the GT. There's a lot of variants of this bike, but the one thing that they all have in common is, well, the layout, the general basis. The engine, the frame, all of that is the same. That means you get a lot of power, about 150 horsepower from the factory, but they put down about 140 to the rear wheel. So there might be a little bit of, well, at least for the older bikes, the ones with the bigger cams, there might be a little bit of sandbagging going on there. Anyway, I'm kind of gushing a little bit, and I'll just afford me that, because this motorcycle, again, for somebody that may be coming back into motorcycling, you want something that's got old school leader class motorcycle performance, but you don't want to have the very committed riding position that some of those bikes have. This GSX S platform offers up one of the best compromises. You get all of that power. It's very familiar power, so much so that this motorcycle has absolutely no problem fanning through the gears up to 150, 160 miles an hour. And it's stable in the way that it does it. And it just does it so effortlessly. You get that level of performance with ergonomics to boot. It's just a win all the way around. Now, for the Katana, if you're looking at that motorcycle, and if you're watching this video, chances are you might be leaning that direction. You're wise beyond your years. But aside from that, I would say that the biggest gripe that I had with this motorcycle were the handlebars. Could not stand them. There was no way for me to adjust them to ever be comfortable. I found these Sato handlebar setups, absolutely consider it mandatory. Yeah, they're a little bit expensive, but you'll know where your money's been spent. Again, if you're coming from a sport bike background, this handlebar setup makes this motorcycle incredibly familiar to ride, which is probably one of the best compliments that I can give it. And I would not want this bike without that handlebar setup. Matter of fact, if you're thinking about getting one, order the bars now, because they can take a little time to get through production. But with all that being said, guys, I've got to say that in this first 1,000 or so miles of ownership, keep in mind that I bought this motorcycle almost as a new old stock bike. Yes, it was titled previously, but it only had 244 miles on it when I went to ride it, and I put 20 miles on it on a test ride. I mean, I basically put almost 10% of the miles that were on this motorcycle on it the day that I test drove it. It's been through 2 oil changes already, one at about 350 miles, one at about 850 miles. The bike has been absolutely flawless, and the more I ride it, the better that it seems to get. Speaking of better, one of the just huge things for me with this bike that I would never have agreed to believe, if anybody had told me this, that M4 can, the M4 slip-on, just put it on your bike, order it, have it ready with the Satos. If you're thinking about picking up one of these Katanas, it will absolutely, it sounds better, sure, but it actually made the bike a little bit smoother cruising down the highway. I thought that might have been a little bit of a placebo effect. So I took it out over and over and over again. You know, my bad, right? But I couldn't help it. I just thought for sure that I was dreaming this stuff up, but it actually did something with the resonance or whatever, and it made the bike a little bit smoother. So that's what you can expect if you put a slip-on can on this bike. I did remove the restrictor in the air box, but it is still the factory air cleaner, air filter in that box. So again, no real modifications done to the bike. It runs extremely well now, and I could not imagine being happier. The only thing that I might suggest to you, if you're going to be hitting a lot of twisties with this GSX S platform, when it comes time to put tires on the bike, go with a 190/55. The stock 190/50 series tire, it's good for straight up and down riding, and it's stable in long, fast sweepers, but it really kind of makes the bike feel heavier than it really is. I would wholeheartedly suggest going with that 190/55 tire. That's what I'll be going with on this bike next season once it comes time to put tires on this thing. So with that, guys, if you've got one of these bikes, post up your comments, let me know what you think. I would love to hear your feedback. I will tell you this, This bike is probably one of the most enjoyable motorcycling experiences that I've had. It blends ergonomics, power, the look of the thing. I just love that retro style look too. It's got everything that I could have personally wanted in a bike. And if you're watching this video, chances are you're thinking the same. And with that, guys, I'm gonna wrap it up. Y'all have a great one.